Greetings, comrades! You know that the Soviet Union was a country of Soviets, a country of people, a country of workers. And what were the workers supposed to do? That's right, they were supposed to work. But, contrary to popular belief, people in the Soviet Union did not have to work 24 hours a day, not at all. Soviet people certainly knew how to relax. Like many other areas of life in the Soviet Union, the leisure time of the average Soviet citizen was strictly regulated. So today I'm going to tell you about special places where ordinary Soviet people could go every year to rest on the seashore, improve their health and simply have a wonderful time. Meet the sanatoriums. That was the name given to the institutions which simultaneously served as a treatment center and a vacation spot for the weary bodies of Soviet people. Each year, millions of Soviet workers received vouchers to sanatoriums. Under the Soviet Union, sanatoriums represented wonderful recreation, effective treatments, beautiful nature, the opportunity to spend some time with the cream of the crop, and many other pleasant things to the Soviet people. Practically every Soviet man has experienced that feeling of his body changing during the 28 days he spent in a sanatorium. The Soviet Union spent millions of rubles on this industry, also that the workers and peasants were able to rest at the luxurious resort, and then continue to work effectively for the benefit of the country. Let's see how it all came to be and how it worked. In the country of victorious socialism, citizens' recreation was a national task. The right to rest was enshrined constitutionally. In general, it is worth noting that the USSR at the beginning of the 20th century was really ahead of the rest of the world in terms of taking care of ordinary working people. Reasonable work hours with 2 days off, annual vacations for all employees ranging from 15 to 48 working days. It was just a dream. And of course, a wide network of sanatoriums, pension houses, holiday houses, health resorts, recreation centers, various tourist camps. It was Lenin who took care of the health of the Soviet citizens, even before he dealt with the counter-revolution. On April 4, 1919, he signed a decree about medicinal sports of national importance. And in 1920, the Council of People's Commissars issued a decree on the use of the Crimea for treatment of the working people. All subsequent years, the USSR systematically developed health resorts, children's, tuberculosis, balneological, climatic resorts, mud resorts, and so on. By the way, the USSR already had a basis. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were about 35 resorts in Imperial Russia, medicinal areas with derived mineral waters, healing muds, and excellent climate, which were visited by the bourgeoisie and wealthy landlords who did not have a chance to be treated in the European Baden-Baden or Karlovy Vary. But back then, sanatoriums were intended primarily for the treatment of children and patients with tuberculosis. These enterprises exist on private funds or donations. Mass rehabilitation was out of question. First of all, vouchers for these resorts before the revolution were really expensive, and secondly, they simply could not take all potential patients. A simple comparison on the example of the same Crimea. Before the revolution in 1913 there were 13 sanatoriums and resorts, with a total capacity of 305 beds. As of 1989, in the Crimea there were 620 health centers, which had 81.6 thousand year-round beds and 164.2 thousand seasonal beds, hundreds of times more. It is clear that this would have been impossible without the tremendous amounts of work done. By 1920, there were already about 20 all-Soviet resorts, including the Caucasian mineral waters, the Odessa estuaries, the resorts of Siberia and the Black Sea coast. In order to organize health resorts in these territories, all the suitable buildings had to be used. And what is a suitable building? Maybe a summer cottage of some landowner? Even the most historically important buildings have not escaped such a fate. In particular, the luxurious residence of Russian emperors on the Black Sea has become a resort for peasants called Livadia. When the USSR ran out of estates which could be converted to sanatoriums, they started building them from scratch. By 1939, the country had almost 2,200 sanatoriums, boarding houses with medical treatment and health centers with a total capacity of 255,000 beds. At the same time, passive resort relaxation was not welcomed. People who visited Sochi in the 1930s, for example, with a desire to lie on the beach and do nothing for a month, faced with the fact that they were taken on excursions to the local oil fields and factories almost daily. After all, the best way to relax for a Soviet citizen is to admire the power of the country. Naturally, during World War II, all those sanatoriums were turned into military hospitals and places for rehabilitation of the wounded. But after it was over, the construction was resumed with a slightly revised approach to recreation. Let's talk about what types of these institutions existed in the USSR and, most importantly, how Soviet people got there. In fact, there were not only sanatoriums in the USSR. In the Soviet Union there were many different places for recreation and rehabilitation of workers. Sanatoriums, pension houses, recreation centers, tourist centers, spa resorts, mountaineering camps. Some of them were united by the word zdravnitsa, from the word zdarovye, health. Accordingly, it reflected the main purpose of all these institutions – to strengthen the physical and moral health of Soviet citizens. In 1960, the power of the health resort industry was almost completely transferred into the hands of the trade unions. They took over most of the sanatoriums, rest houses and resorts. Accordingly, vouchers for all of these institutions were distributed by the regional and all union centers of trade unions. Vouchers were either free or the employee paid 10 to 30% of its cost. But everything was not so rosy. In order to get the cherished tickets, any means were used. We will talk about this in more detail in the next section. For now, let's look at the types of places for recreation in the USSR. First, all these institutions were located in special designated regions called kurorty, resorts. In the USSR, the resorts could be areas with natural healing properties, used for treatment, mineral springs, therapeutic mud or special climatic conditions, sea, lakes, mountainous landscapes, forests, etc. Resorts were divided into mountain, seaside or other categories. Accordingly, depending on the climate and conditions, the range of the institutions represented in a particular resort differed as well. Sanatory. A sanatorium was the main inpatient treatment and prevention facility of any resort. It was a place where medical procedures were performed, and not always the traditional ones. Physiotherapy and remedial exercises could be combined with mud treatment, steam inhalations, special mineral waters or magnetic therapy. It was a place where Soviet people could recover from any illness. Mainly people were sent there immediately after a long stay in hospital, for rehabilitation. Another interesting feature of sanatoriums were their architectural characteristics. It so happened that many sanatorium buildings were at the forefront of the era's innovation and creativity. The selected architects were graced with more creative freedoms than other designers in USSR, and these architects clearly did not hold back their imagination. Look at this sanatorium in the Crimea, or this one in Tajikistan. But as luxurious as it all looked from the outside, the atmosphere inside was very much Spartan. Rooms were very plain and simple. Meals were taken in communal dining halls and leisure time was scheduled. Group activities were encouraged, which fed into the Soviet tenet of collective living. If you did not need medical treatment, there were vacation homes or pension houses at your service. Pensionaty or дома отдыха. They were organized in the most beautiful places, near seas, lakes and forests, so that vacationers could relax as much as possible. But no one would let you just lie in bed there. The same strict schedule: hiking, immunity-boosting exercises, and sun baths, physical training. However, they did not forget about cultural development too. There were constant amateur contests, symphonic and chamber music evenings, dance contests, etc., etc. If you loved your job so much that you did not want to go to the other side of the country, there were sanatoriy profilaktoriy for you. Sanatoriums preventoriums. Not the best translation probably, so let's call them mini-sanatoriums. In fact, they were mini sanatoriums that were located in close proximity to large enterprises. Basically, it was a boarding house in which the worker could rest for 24 days from his household chores. He was fed there and underwent some simple medical procedures. Except that he still had to go to work every day, so the benefits of such a vacation are kinda questionable for me personally. And finally, базы отдыха, recreation camps. They distinguished themselves by the fact that usually each particular recreation center was assigned to an enterprise and was located in the same region as the enterprise itself, while large sanatoriums and vacation homes were all union and were located in resort areas. As a rule, the whole set of activities there was the same as in large resorts, but only employees of a particular plants and factories with their families came there during vacations. So I've painted you a pretty bright picture, with hundreds of interesting institutions specially created by the state to take care of its citizens. Of course, I cannot help but slightly spoil this rosy picture. First of all, for all the variety of Soviet recreational facilities, not every Soviet citizen had a chance to rest there. Let us take the official statistics from 1975. In 1975, 8.3 million workers were treated in the Soviet Union's health resorts. An impressive figure, isn't it? But it is worth remembering that the population of the USSR at that time was about 255 million people. That is, about 3% of the country's population vacationed in health resorts every year. Still not bad. But now, let us remember that the statistics did not differentiate between the luxurious vacation home on the Black Sea and the sanatorium preventorium of the plant next door. Both were considered to be recreation in the health resort. Besides, we must admit that mostly all these vouchers to elite boarding houses were received by residents of the European part of Russia, the Baltics and Ukraine. I do not think that Tajiks, Kazakhs and Uzbeks visited Sochi frequently. Now about the free vouchers. Let me remind you that not all vouchers were issued for free, but only a third. And in order to get a voucher, it was necessary to endure a full-blown war. First, the voucher were received by the leadership of the enterprise and nomenclatura, then the trade union committee members, then political departments workers, then the political activists, and only then some of ordinary workers got them. On average, a union member could get a good voucher once every 10 years. But there were also those who vacationed every year. Don't forget about blood. Naturally, the sanatoriums and pension houses had deluxe suites for enterprise directors, ministers, etc. When the chairman of the Council of Ministers, Kosygin, came to Yurmala, 2 floors, the 8th and the 10th, were closed to everyone at once in the Riga Bay pension. The 9th floor was Kosygin's suite. And Brezhnev liked to rest at the Emba Beach Sanatorium in Young Kemeria. There was a separate building built specifically for him there. Now there's a museum. Tourists could sit in his chair or have a meal in the dining room with dishes from the menu of those years. There were also separate vacation homes for members of the Central Committee. They especially loved the Black Sea coast. For an ordinary person to get a voucher to a Black Sea sanatorium or vacation home in summer was an enormous success. In winter, no problem, go ahead. In summer, only local holiday homes or unpopular tourist routes were available. And to get a voucher to some resort in a brotherly Bulgaria was something unbelievable. I can give you an example of my parents, each of whom had worked for over 20 years in large Soviet enterprises. Of the 2 of them, only my mother received a voucher to Bulgaria once, and it was far from free. 2 or 3 times they got vouchers to Baltic or Black Sea resorts. All other times, only vouchers to hiking tours or local recreation camps. And not everyone even had a theoretical opportunity to get a voucher. Therefore, the majority of holidaymakers on the Black Sea went there on self-organized trips, that is, without any vouchers, with the hope of renting a corner from some local owner, for which they charged a huge price tag, just like in Russia today, and with a bunch of restrictions. No cooking in the house, no hanging out inside the house during the day, no staying out late at night either. So, recreation in the USSR was of course quite unique, and it was well organized, but it was not always accessible to everyone. However, you can still catch up. Today, many buildings of sanatoriums and vacation homes have fallen into decay, but some resorts continue to accept guests. Not only their interiors, but also their methods have been preserved from the Soviet times. So if you want to feel all the things a Soviet worker felt when he came to a famous sanatorium for the first time in his life, you are welcome to visit and try it yourself.